All right. Good evening, everyone. Yang Yan Zhao back again. Tonight, we have artist, inker extraordinaire, and author creator of the DragonRage series, Jimmy Reyes.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I can't take credit though for the author. When it came to writing, I knew that I'm not the best when it comes to writing.
Mhm.
So I believe you want the best player in every position, to make a strong team. So I got lucky. I got a writer and David Philpott, and the guy just, I don't know what it was, but like somehow he could work with just the crazy ideas that I've got going on in my head. He could organize them and create a story out of it.
So then, as an artist, like so you say, okay, I got this idea. I don't think I can quite get it to where I want. What are you looking for in a writer?
I want a writer who understands that the story's got to be character driven. When you say character driven, it has to be great characters, and so there has to be something. There also has to be a reason, a motivation behind each character, And
Hmm.
I like it when, say that this is just a generic story. So, like if I come to the writer and I go, "Hey, I've got this great idea of a guy who can, he he's got to take down these superpowered beings. He's got to fight
Hmm.
them." And then I want the writer to understand that, okay, you got to create something where maybe it was two brothers, and these two brothers end up on opposite sides. One brother is now faced taking down the superheroes, but the other brother is for the superheroes. And so there's this conflict between the two of, how do you battle against somebody that you love? And we can all relate because it's relatable because we all have family and we all have siblings. Most of us have siblings that, and there's this type of conflict and things. So things like that where it has to be, kind of like heartfelt, heart driven. There has to be conflict in the story. Like those are the type of things that I love. And the example I always look at is, like the Walking Dead. I think Robert Kirkman did a great job of that.
Hmm.
Made the story really human and not just focused on the action and zombies.
Yeah, it's crazy too that happened based on. I've read a lot of interviews with him and about him, and like all the stuff like editorial at Image wanted him to change,
Yeah.
but somehow his ideas won out. And I mean, hey, it's world famous. Everybody loves it.
Yeah. I mean, he really did something really different, because at the time, even today, really, the comic book industry is dominated by superhero stories.
Yeah.
And a lot of these superhero stories can get really campy, really corny, and it's just flooded out there. And I love that Robert Kirkman came in and he created something just different. It was stories about humans. It was a relation between a father and a son, you know, and then you placed them in this environment, and the environment was secondary, but the characters and their stories were primary. And that's what I look for in my comic books.
Mm. So, how important would you say that is to you now that you're working on your own books? Like, you sort of get a bit of a choice between um, sort of the way things are by dominated by the big three, but you can also go on your own way. How do you sort of navigate you to put what you feel is important in there?
Well, whenever I was working on a project in the mainstream, I was working as an inker. So as an inker, I mean, I would just come in and I was just part of the assembly line, and I was just basically doing the finishing work. So I really didn't get to contribute anything as far as story or creativity. I just got to polish up and finish the penciler's work. So when the opportunity came that I could, crowdfunding scene is building up. We got tons of, we have, the Comics Gate out there was the
Hmm.
first putting stuff together, making this a reality. A lot of creators coming together and fans coming together for this movement. It opened up a lot of doors where I could now show what I could do, my creativity, because when I was working for the mainstream, they weren't interested in any of my ideas because unless it's an IP that they would own and control, they weren't interested in it. They were just looking for monetary value in it. and could we market this? How much money could we make off of it? That's all they cared about. At least it's how I felt, how it was presented to me. But today in crowdfunding, anybody, everybody, that has an idea, I
Hmm.
encourage you, get it out there, because and try to do something different, innovative, and that'll help push this medium forward. But it'll also bring in variety and
Yeah.
diversity in genre, because we're not all into the same genre and things. And that's what the U.S. comic market needs right now. It needs a variety of stories.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like my what happened to the comic book industry looks like one of those old detective movies where there's like a bunch of pictures and strings like connecting all the
Yeah,
pictures.
yeah,
Um, but if we look even to like the very early '80s, there were tons of genres in the comics industry.
yeah.
Westerns had fallen in the '70s, but you still had war comics, you
Hmm.
had sci-fi, you had various kinds of fantasy,
Yeah,
um, more horror.
yep.
But for some reason, by the end of the '80s, everything was capes and cowls.
Yeah, and even before that, before I think the 70s, like back in the 60s, we had
Hmm.
romance. Romance was
Yeah.
around for a while, and then we had like Archie comics, kind of the teen, more of the teen pop
Hmm.
type of stories. And it was in the comic book industry, it goes up and it goes down. Where there were times where things were doing very well, and then there were times where the market was crashing, and people felt the industry was going to die back in the 80s, and
Yeah.
then it popped back up. And then just before the 90s boom, they were seeing a decline again. And then in the 90s, boom, somehow comics just was booming. Everybody wanted in on it. And then we're in that phase now where it's declining. But to be completely honest with the comic book industry right now, I mean, we are facing a lot more competition today than we ever were. And they felt back
Hmm.
then that television was competing with comics as the way we feel today, that people are now turning to video games and competing with
Hmm.
video games, and children are watching, TikTok videos and
Yep.
short videos and not really reading comic books.
Yeah. I mean, well, but I kind of disagree with that. And because if you look at manga, and I personally don't think manga and comics are the same thing. I
No.
think they're both kinds of sequential art. They're similar, but manga is huge. Go to any bookstore, they've got entire walls
Yes.
devoted to manga.
I believe the reason that manga is so huge right now is because of the fact of that it has diversity. And when I say diversity, people get confused. So I should explain. What I mean is diversity in genre, not
Yeah.
diversity in any type of like race or anything like that, but or ethnicity or anything. But it has a diversity in genre. And I joke around with people and I go, no matter what you're into, manga has it. Like if you're into comics about feet, manga has it.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
books about magic and you're into superheroes, whatever it is, they have it. They have so many sub genres that I was talking to my son and I said, I've got this story for this comic book, and it's about a young lady who gets whisked into, taken from Earth, our time, goes into another world like Dorothy from Oz, ends up in
Hmm.
another world, or like the Labyrinth, where you get taken away. And he goes, yeah, that's manga has that. It's isekai. And I went, oh my God, they have a genre for that? And he's like, yeah, he's got a
Yep.
whole subgenre for it. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of weird. I lived in Tokyo for 2.5 years, and
Yeah.
they had manga cafes, which are it's basically like a coffee shop, except they have walls and walls of manga that you could just go and borrow, as long as you're paying for a drink. And I remember one night I was looking through it, and I found one about a guy whose superpower was the ability to make the perfect food for business meetings. Like if he was there, he would seal the deal with like his
Wow.
magic sushi or
Yeah.
dumplings or something like that.
Well, they do that in the culture, and I mean, I'm not telling you because you live there, but what I've learned is that in that culture, a lot of coworkers will then go out to dinner after work,
Yep.
and then based on seniority is based on how you sit. around the table. You know, there's a spot for, and I forget what they call it. The person who has the seniority there at the office, but they do that, and
Hmm.
they kind of they take a lot. They put a lot of honor into, you know, the type of meals and stuff like they'll present to people, or whenever you have guests over, which is it's so different. Like I mean, my
Yeah.
son was in the Marines, and so he was in Japan, and he was telling me like in America we feel obligated that whenever the waiter comes out that we have to tip them. But he said in Japan he was so taken by the fact that the chef came out, thanked him for allowing for the chef that said thank you for allowing me to prepare and make your meal for you, and that to offer a tip over there was offensive.
Yeah, they take hospitality super serious over there. And and it's kind of interesting because here, my grandma, she was born early 30s, but they had the culture, she grew up in Appalachia, so most people didn't have TVs when she was growing up. And it was like people would just stop in for a visit, and you had to have like something to eat, usually sweets. You had
Yeah.
to have something to drink. So like she always had like a full case of Coke and some sweet tea and like
Yeah.
a few tins of cookies and stuff. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't know. I think in the US we really lost out.
We
Um,
yeah, we have whenever I go visit my friends, I'm like, "Hey man, you got something to drink?" They're like, "Fridge is right there, man. Help yourself." You know? And I'm like,
not
"We're
quite
so."
the same.
Yeah, it's not quite the same, you know. And they look at it as like, "Nah, man, this is your home. Make yourself comfortable." But it's yeah, is it really? It's not really. It's not the type of hospitality I think that, I think it's lost something.
Yeah. And I agree with you for sure. One of the big features for manga is that they have so much diversity. Like there really is something for everyone. Do you ever see the US comic industry getting back to something like that?
Yeah, I do. I think it's growing now. I have not been into a comic store, or had not been into a comic store in about well, since the pandemic, since we had a quarantine
Hmm.
and they closed the doors down. I started ordering online, and I got so used to it and spoiled. I just continued to do that, but I missed going into the comic store, because when you physically go into a comic store, it's a whole different experience. So I grabbed the wife, and said, "Hey, let's go into the comic store. We haven't been there in so long." So we go down there, and as soon as you walk in, like you can smell like the body odor and the new paper smell, just
Yeah,
mixed
yeah, yeah,
together, and
yeah.
it's like, you're in a comic store,
That like 13-year-old boy goat like smell that's always lingering.
Yeah, playing Pokemon cards over in the back
Exactly.
corner, and the new comics on the wall. And so when we went in there, majority of the comic books on the shelf were independent comics. It wasn't
Really?
dominated. Yeah, it wasn't dominated by Marvel, DC. This comic store, in order to survive, realized that they had to then go into tabletop games, playing cards,
Nice.
and then they also had to do more independent comics. And so
Hmm.
on the shelf, they still have Marvel, DC, but they take up a small row together, and they're just like huge amount of independence. And they said the younger
Nice.
kids are really, and they're selling manga, of course.
Oh,
Manga's got,
hey, they gotta eat.
yeah, manga has a huge section. Comics has just, a couple of shelves in the wall. But they were telling me that the younger kids now are starting to come over and picking up independence. And that
Really?
the adults 40 years and older were the ones that were coming in picking up like Marvel and the DC and the facsimile editions and stuff.
Um, that's really interesting to hear. I moved out of California in 2022, and before I moved, there I was lucky enough to have like five different shops that were close to where I lived or where I worked,
Wow.
and they were all like the complete opposite of that. It was
Yeah.
like I remember like one place I wanted to order some Alterna books, and this is back when Alterna was still in the stores. And the guy's like, no, nobody likes those. Nobody wants to buy those. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I want to buy those. Can you just order some? He's like, no. It's like, well, okay.
Wow.
All right, then. And that place is out of business.
I
Uh,
When I got into comic books, I didn't know comics existed at all until I was about 18 years old, and at that time, Image Comics was coming out, They were the
Hmm.
hottest thing, you know. So I got to get into, you know, comic books with new characters that from issue number one, brand new characters that were just starting to establish. Whereas, you know, at the time back then in the 90s, you know, X-Men had already been around, you know, 30 years, and
Yeah.
there was a long history with them. So for me, I loved the Image Comics, and people were calling them independent. And I went, oh, okay, I didn't know the difference. And so comic store owners at that time would tell me, well, if you like independent, let me show you some other books. You know, at the time it was the Men in Black, you know, that were
Hmm.
being published by Aerosol Comics. They had some older Ninja Turtles that were out, and they were showing me The Crow. And so I got into independent comics right off the bat, you know, with Caliber. I love that Negative Burn, the anthology, and I used to collect
Hmm.
that a whole lot. And so I got into that. I didn't get into any of the mainstream stuff, but like you mentioned, when I would go to comic stores and I would ask for independent titles, they were hard to find. Most of the time back then, I
Yeah.
mean, most stores didn't carry them.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. There was some controversy with Mark Millar just about a month ago, and he did a stream with four comic shop owners, which, you know, in some ways I really appreciated the fact that he had them on and that they really got to air their grievances with at least the big two,
Yeah.
and sort of let people know what's going on from their point of view. However, if it were me instead of Mark, I definitely had some questions. Like one of the guys was like, "No, we don't have indies because they don't sell," and it's like, well, you know, how can there be all these campaigns online, $1 million, $200,000, $100,000, $50,000? How can those sell that much, but you can't sell any at a store? You know, so to me,
Yeah.
it's there's still some kind of resistance there that I don't completely understand. I don't understand if it's political, or I don't understand if it's like an economic thing. Like they're worried, you know, if they carry Dragon Rage, well, next time people are just going to buy straight from you and cut them out.
Well, I
You
think there's
know.
some truth to what the comic store owner said. And the reason that I can see that is that, you know, we had Eric July. He had a really
Hmm.
huge following, and he released a book that no one had heard of. It was a brand new IP. He didn't really give any preview pages. He didn't talk about much of the story, and yet he hit, you know, a multi-million-dollar campaign. So a lot of the people are backing the creator, or backing the personality, an online personality, as to backing for getting in because this is a story that they really like. So
Hmm.
when and what happens is in the comic stores, they don't have that personality there. It's disconnected. It's just a title on its own, you know. And online, we have the advantage where they get to know us and they're supporting us as creators. So there could be, I mean, that could be, you know, what's happening there, you know. But it is, I would say, also it is a responsibility as well to the comic store owner. And this might be controversial, but what I believe is that it's up to them to sell the
Yeah.
products and the comic books and the titles or whatever it is in their store. Because when I walk in my local comic store, we walked in. I know the owner, but I don't know his employees because I haven't been there. I hadn't been there in a few years, and it was all new faces. They greeted me right away, started up conversation with
Nice.
me right away to find out what is it that I like, what am I searching for, you know. And then once they saw I knew the owner, they were like, "Oh, okay." But doing that, knowing your customer, made a big difference, I think.
Yeah, I would say so. You know, I've always said that there needs to be more used car salesmen in the industry.
Yeah,
Like, you know,
definitely.
you need to walk into a car and
Yeah.
say, "Hello there, handsome sir. How can I put you in a new comic today?"
Yeah, we need more Robin
You know?
Williams, you know, and
Exactly.
yeah, there was a movie Robin Williams had where he was a used car salesman. I forget the name of it, but I can't believe I'm
Oh,
drawing
I
a
don't
blank.
remember that one.
But it's great. Oh, you guys got to watch it. It's such everybody who's watching, or yourself as well. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead. You were saying more
Oh,
car
no, no, no,
salesmen.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the thing. Like, there's so many things that confuse me about the way it's sold. Like, okay, so part of the issue for me is we've really had a problem since probably the late 90s, early 2000s, where we kind of lost a generation of readers. Um, when you and I were young, I'm sure you probably got your first comic either at a supermarket, at a gas station, at a convenience store, maybe at a bookstore, and they were on a spinner rack somewhere. Whereas the kids these days, they don't. They're at comic stores. And the problem with that is you don't go to a comic store unless you're going to buy comic stuff. Like, I don't go to the golf store because I don't golf,
Right.
So how will people see these new books? Um, so that's one issue where if someone does wander in, how do they know what's good and what's not? And most places are just divided by like Marvel, DC. If you're lucky, they'll have a section for Image. And then maybe there's like a pile in the back corner that's all full of dust and cobwebs. That would be whatever indie books they ended up with somehow.
Yeah.
Like, to me, when I go into a bookstore, I say, okay, do I want science fiction? Do I want Westerns? So why aren't the comics grouped like that? Number one.
Yeah.
And like some places will have like, um, we'll have like employee recommendations and stuff, but we really need like comic sommeliers where, oh, you like science fiction with a touch of dark humor. Okay, well, you could go for these series and that
Yeah.
series. And then also, I think to an extent, there's something to be said for the argument that, manga is easy because it starts with one and then it goes to whenever it finishes. Whereas, like, if you want to jump in with Batman, they've rebooted that series so many times. Like,
Yeah.
where would you tell someone to start?
Yeah, and then like, how do you know what you're reading? Where does it fit in the lineage of the history of Batman? But that's a great idea. We should have some wine in the comic stores and just,
Yeah.
like some of these. That'll bring in people.
Well, I mean, to me, I like the comic stores that really have embraced
Yeah,
more of like the gaming store stuff.
yeah.
Gaming stores, I mean, they're kind of hurting now too, for economic reasons. But the thing about gaming stores is there's a community, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like on the comic side, in general, it's like you go in, you buy your stuff, and you
It's
leave.
like you're buying adult material. You just don't look at me. Don't look at me. You're ashamed of what you're buying. And
Yeah,
you take it out in a
exactly.
little brown bag and you're
It-
out the door.
don't show any girls.
Yeah, don't show any girls.
But yeah, but I mean, like, why can't they have like, I don't know, like Friday nights? They're
Yeah,
gonna have like some preview of like some series where maybe somebody who works at the store is going to talk about
yeah.
like such and such
Like
artists
like
a
book
run
clubs.
and
Yeah.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah, but for
exactly.
comic book club, and
You
that's the
know,
thing. Like you said, community. You have that interaction when you're
yeah,
doing tabletop gaming or when you're playing Pokemon cards or whatever the
exactly.
kids play today. But for me, like I came in similar to this generation. I came into comics when comics were in the comic book stores, so you had to go to a
Hmm.
specialty store.
Hmm.
I had
Interesting.
never discovered any comic books because I had never visited a specialty store. And I grew up in the ghetto. I grew up very, very poor. And so as a child, I had cancer as a toddler. So I spent my
Oh,
adolescence in and out of the hospital and having cancer. People were scared. They didn't want to, let their kid go hang out with the cancer kid. You might catch it. So I didn't get to play and interact with other children. And then it wasn't until I was about 13, I got adopted by my sister, who was then living in an upper middle class neighborhood.
hmm.
So I got introduced to a whole new world. I mean, where I moved from the ghetto where you don't make eye contact to a neighborhood where we had a directory in our middle school that had everyone's first, last name, and home telephone number. So I got to meet this kid named Eric, and he told me that he's like, hey, when you come on over, I just got Final Fantasy, so instead of going to the movies, I'm gonna stay and play Final Fantasy. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. As long as I get out of my house, right? I wanted to go.
Hmm.
So I went there, and here he is. He's playing this video game, Final Fantasy. I didn't know what it was, and he had comic books on his bed that he just got from mail delivery, and so from his subscription. So I picked him up, and we're looking at him. And that evening, his mom was taking him to the comic store. So I rode along. I had no idea at the comic store. And this is like what we were talking about. When I got there, Nobody directed us. Nobody greeted us. The
Yep.
guy behind the counter was a teenager, and he was reading a comic himself, and he just picked his head up and went, "Hey," and then we walked in. You just hear the door go cling, cling, the bell, and he left us alone. But luckily, my friend knew comics. He was all excited, and he was that saw me, like, you want to get this guy because of this, and in issue number 142, he battled so and so, blah blah. Like, he was so excited. He was telling me, I'm like, okay. And then his mom said, you know what, and pick a comic, pick something there. I'm gonna buy it for you. And I went, okay, great. And I still didn't know. My friend said, you know what, get this one. You got to get this one. It was a reprint. Youngblood #1 was back in stock. Gotta get it. Gotta get it.
Oh,
So I looked at it and I thought, all right, it didn't appeal to me. I know it was the hottest thing, but I wasn't part of the FOMO, and I wasn't part
hmm,
of the, where everybody's excited about it. I looked at it from an outside perspective and just went like, all right, why? Like, why should I get this comic? But then I looked on the table, because they used to put comics on a flat surface
yeah,
table.
yeah.
I looked down, and it just went like this big ray of light, like, oh, and it was Jim Lee Scott Williams, Wildcats #1. And I went, oh my God, like, wow, this was amazing. And I wanted that. And I put down Youngblood, and his mom said, no, I'll get both for you. So I didn't
Wow.
want to say no. And I said, okay, okay. But that was my introduction into the world of comic books. That's how I discovered them. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So I agree with the used car salesman that you were saying, and we need to get the comic books out into areas where, had they been in corner stores at the time in the '90s, which they weren't in 7-Elevens, and I lived in the ghetto, the corner store was popular because that's where everybody went to get their alcohol. But I
Yep.
remember like, oh Lordy, wow. At 7-Eleven, we didn't have comics at 7-Eleven. If we did at ours, man, I would have spotted them, but you know, I didn't discover them until I just by chance ended up in an adventure to the local comic store.
That's a great story. I think you might be the first person of a certain age to say they went to the comic store first, rather than you just discovered it somewhere when you were
Yeah,
shopping with your mom or your dad. That's really interesting.
yeah.
Um,
Most
mhm.
people my
No, go ahead.
age are our age. Most people our
Mhm.
age. Because I've been told people a lot of times don't guess my age. I'm very old. I'm a grandfather, so I'm old.
Wow.
But I didn't get to experience pop culture like everyone else. Because where I live, the only things that I ever saw were cartoons on television. That
Hmm.
was the only experience I had to pop culture. And unfortunately, I mean, growing up poor, I never got like GI Joes, Transformers, or anything like that. I didn't get in, play Atari or any of that stuff. So I missed out on so much. And it wasn't until later on in life that I was able to start experiencing all this stuff.
When you did, was it sort of like the floodgates open and like I have to get all this stuff now?
Yes, I went crazy. I wanted comic books, but I was 18 years old, and I couldn't afford them. I was living with my sister, who had her own business, and we were living in an upper middle class area, and she would give me a small allowance, but it was, even at the time, at $1.95 for the Image comics, it wasn't enough to buy all the Image comics that I wanted. So I started to volunteer at the comic store, and they would give me a store credit just for helping them out,
Nice.
bagging and boarding comics, or helping them fill sub boxes and stuff like that. So I would do that. I would work for comics, and that's how I was able to buy all those comics.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
So I would say, you made your bones inking for others.
yeah.
Now I've actually wanted to have you on for a couple of years now. A few years ago, I had Ryan Wynn on,
Oh yeah,
who
yeah,
is also an inker, and I asked him this question. So mm, all right, so part of the job of the inker is to provide volume.
yeah,
So you have basically the outlines, and based on the way you lay down the inks, it gives the illusion of depth in an image. And back in the day, when everything was on newsprint and the print technology was not so good, inkers were 100% essential to make it look a little bit more realistic, rather than the colors, because you just couldn't you couldn't blend colors, you couldn't do a lot of the stuff you can do now. So in modern comics, a lot of the new books I see, they almost look more like coloring books to me, because instead of like the detailed inking that,
Mm.
we were all used to in decades past, they're trying to make that volume all by colors.
Yeah.
So do you think that the inker um, is going to go the way of the dinosaur and like
Oh, the dodo
slowly
bird.
die out? Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Just go off the cliff. No, when comic books were back, I mean, back in the 1940s and things, the way things were
Mhm.
reproduced, you needed inking. It was essential in order for it to be reproduced because you couldn't reproduce pencils as
Mhm.
clear back then. So they were essential. They needed them. And then as the printing process began to progress and we could put in finer lines in the 90s, a lot of the ink style went to quill. And we started to use a lot more, dip pens and quill because you could,
Mhm.
the fine lines would print. But even then in the 90s, we really couldn't print really fine lines. We couldn't go in there and put too fine of lines because they would just disappear when they were reproduced. Today, the printing process is so advanced that, like you said, I mean, I could do, you could do ink wash. I mean, I could put in so much fine lines. You would think that people would want to take advantage of that and go even more hyper detailed in the artwork. But I think a couple of things happen where one is the pay doesn't support that, where the page rates don't support that kind of pay, where
Mhm.
artists now today, where the page rates used to be $450 a page. Typical artists that come in today are getting about $100 a page. And so in order to make that feasible, is be able to support yourself, the faster that you can produce art, faster you can work, then you'll be able to make more money. So I think they're taking shortcuts now where they are, and it's no longer, it's felt like it's no longer viewed upon as an art,
Mhm.
where most of us, then in the 90s, we took so much pride in our art that we were all so competitive that we want to impress our peers. We want to be better and outdo the other guy. And it just seems like now they don't have that. And art seems to be diminishing in comics.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. Although there are a lot of people in the indie scene that they're like, "Oh no, I'm gonna do like inking to the nth degree,"
Yeah.
and it might take them like 2 years to get a book out, but the quality is there. Do you see sort of that like bifurcation continuing in the industry? Because there were always comics that had less of that, like even the Mickey Mouse kind of stuff.
Mm.
They were a lot simpler, and you could really do it a lot faster. There wasn't a whole lot of hatching and whatnot. And then there were other books which were, I mean, like you could go full Bernie Wrightson, and like that is
Yeah.
is his Frankenstein book has to be one of the greatest art achievements of the 20th century. So do you see like a like sort of like a two-tiered level coming up,
Well, I
or?
mean, it also, I don't think we can compare Mickey Mouse art style to Bernie Wrightson. I mean, it's
Well, yeah, that's
two
true.
different,
That's true.
two different types of art style. But I think what it is that a lot of the younger artists today are growing up with, they learn to draw digitally and they're
Hmm.
very influenced by manga. So they didn't grow up with looking back at Bernie Wrightson and going, well, that's the bar. And that's
Yeah.
the level I've got to, be at or above. And there are still a lot of artists in comics who still love the art form and the medium. So a lot of those guys are in the independent, producing amazing artwork that's out there. And unfortunately, though, for the inkers, they've already gone the way pretty much of the dinosaur. And inkers would be someone who would come in and embellish the artwork. We would add more detail and clarity
Hmm.
into, fine, just give it that fine finesse, to the pencils. And it was beautiful. But because of the type of page rates right now, artists are
Yeah.
now learning to ink. Pencilers are just doing everything, inking on their own. But there are still those guys out there, myself included, where I want my art to stand on its own. I don't want it to be aided by color. I don't want it to depend on color to enhance my artwork. It's great if color comes in and enhances my work. That's great, but I don't want to use it as a crutch. Just like
Mm.
today, a lot of the argument is, should artists that are working digitally, should they use 3D assets? You know, that's kind of the way I feel about color. You know, in my comic book, I go, I want my work to stand on its own in black and white.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I always thought that color was most effective when it was a get helping the eye to focus on a certain area, but also to sort of amp up the emotion of a scene.
Yeah, there's a lot of advantages to color. I mean, color can create mood. You know,
Hmm.
it's like when you watch a movie and the movie, if the movie's not color graded correctly, then it kind of takes you out of it. Like where you look at the movie The Matrix, and
Hmm.
they did some color grading in that, where their colorist came in, gave it this like bluish green hue tone, and it really set the mood. You can
Yeah.
do the same thing in comic books, and it really comes down to a colorist. That's why artists find colorists and they generally stick with them because they can complement their work really well. You have to have an eye for it, and unfortunately, there's not a lot of colorists that have very much painting experience. You know, traditional
Yeah.
painting, coloring. So, not every colorist out there really has this type of knowledge where they can really enhance your work. Or, like you said, they can make something. They can make add kind of like a depth of field, kind of like what you and
Yeah.
I have on our cameras, where I'm in focus, my background is blurred, but it's still there. And there are some colors that really know how to do that, and they can make characters stand out from the background.
Yeah. Color is my other big question mark for the comic industry in general. Because most mangas are black and white,
Yeah.
people who are coming up now, they don't really have a very good sample of how to use color. And I think most modern color in comic books is just vomit inducing. Like
Yeah.
they don't have any color theory. It's like trees are green, ground is brown,
Yeah.
sky is blue. Like
Yeah.
like I was looking at one. Um, this is actually an India book, but they had on their I can't remember if it's Indiegogo or Kickstarter, but it was like the most intense blue sky was up in the right corner, and they clearly used the clouds filter in Photoshop. And
Oh
then
wow.
the tops of the trees were green,
Yeah.
and the tree trunks were all brown. The ground was brown, and the characters, there were two people fighting with a sword, and they were wearing brown, and they were really hard to pick out. And I was trying to figure out like all the problems with this thing. And after about 5 minutes, I realized, holy crap, there's a third character in this scene,
Oh wow.
and it's just like, oh,
That's
why?
yeah. I mean, there's a lot that really goes into it. And I think looking at like the older masters that were
Yeah,
actually painters, looking outside of comics, I think is where colors should study. And it just hurts picturing it. Yeah, me too. I thought the same thing. But you know, it's like the lights that reflect off the character. You know, the sky
hmm,
will reflect off of us, and you know, it affects the way that the color is hitting us and the type of light source. And there's a lot of things to be factored into it that go into there, and it takes years and years of mastery to really become a good colorist. And I've got a few
yeah,
friends that are really good, and they've been coloring for years, and even they hesitate to call themselves like masters at it. You know, they're just now starting to get to the point where they're really starting to understand color.
it's so subjective, but it's so interesting to think that there were people who were working on books. They would put out like 12 to 18 books a year, and their colors are just so easy, so much easier to read,
Yeah.
like 30 years ago than they are now. And it's like everybody forgot all those lessons because we moved on to better quality paper in printing.
Yeah, yeah, and then computer colorists, things that are out here. There's a lot of things you can fake with computer coloring,
Yeah.
and they can kind of fake the mastery look with it. But I think the guys that have really studied and they really understand, like you said, color theory and different hues and like how color really can enhance and it's used in artwork. Those guys stand out, and there's actually a handful. I think maybe just a little more than a handful, but in the entire comic industry that are actually really good colorists. and
Yeah,
it's saturated and filled with just guys that are just know how to use the computer and just pop in color, you know.
definitely. And speaking of color, what would you say is the color of rage? We have
Yeah,
Dragon Rage.
yeah.
Uh, so first of all, this is the second volume, right?
Yeah, it's the I wouldn't say second volume. It's now being reimagined,
Oh, okay.
but it would technically would be my third campaign. I ran two campaigns before that were successful. They were fulfilled, completed. But you know, when if you want to stand out in the indie scene and you want to in crowdfunding, if you want to stand out, you got to create something new, something fresh,
Hmm.
something different. So I didn't want to create. I knew right off the bat when it came time to create my book, I wasn't going to do my version of Batman. I wasn't going to go do my version of the Darkness or my version of Spawn or anything like that. There's no point. I can't compete with 75 years of Batman.
Yeah.
Why would they buy my book? And so I wanted to create something new, something different. So I created the idea of what if a young girl had the ability to become a dragon. So I put that book out in 2020. Then I was sitting back and I was watching an anime because I love anime. I watch anime pretty often. And this young girl turns into a dragon. And I went, man. So I went back, told my writer, so we stopped. I said, I want to stop. And he's like, why? We can work that into the story and kind of change her powers. And I said, no, I want to go back to the drawing board. And it took 2 years of just working on the story, thinking about what I wanted and how I wanted to make it different. And the writer, friend of mine, Dave Philpott, he wrote up a story for me, and he did an amazing job, and that's where we are today. So that's why I've relaunched Dragon Rage. It's
Okay.
it's 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 a whole new idea.
Uh, and so, what is it about this idea that really grabbed you?
Well, I thought like what because I know that we're dominated by the industry is dominated by fans of superheroes, and
Hmm.
and as human beings, we've always played with the idea of being powerful as gods. Greek mythology, their stories, those were the first superheroes, were human beings, that had powers of the gods. They were demigods, and, heroes. And that's what people look up to, that's what people,
Hmm.
I think, why we admire guys like Captain America or, Superman. So I thought, what if you had the power of a dragon? You know, what would that be like? And then that's what spun off this new version of Dragon Rage.
Nice. So why don't you run us through it a little bit? Give
Yeah.
us the
So
lowdown.
yeah. So in Dragon Rage, we created a new race. We call them Dragari. Well, they're humans, and you can think of them like Jedi Knights. So they're humans, but they have this rare ability. Kind of like there are certain humans that are force sensitive in Star Wars. Well, in Dragon Rage, there are certain humans that have the ability to consume and take the rage of the dragon, which is the source of its power. They can consume the rage of the dragon, wield the powers of that dragon as their own. So they can become as powerful, as strong. They can be as fast. They live longer. They manifest scales, so they don't need armor because they have the dragon scales. So they're fireproof. Regular men with swords, can't cut them down. Can't cut through the dragon scales. So I didn't want to make them dragon scales completely through their body because I want them to have some vulnerability. So there's some exposed flesh and skin that can be
Hmm.
injured as a regular human. I didn't want to create the whole Superman, where Superman was just so OP and was like, oh, what do we give him weakness? Okay, how about a glowing green rock and the color yellow? I'm like, what? That beats this Superman.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't want that syndrome, So so there are risks in the world of Dragon Rage here. So as they're consuming this power for the Dragon Rage becoming, dragons are the most destructive force in the world of Dragon Rage. So when they're becoming more powerful, that the Dragon Rage itself is very seductive. It's very easy to want more and seek more and more power, become more and more powerful. So the more Dragon Rage they use, the less human they are. So they run the risk
Ah.
of losing their humanity where the rage takes over. You could think of that version of them like a Sith Lord, where it's
Mhm.
just the rage and the anger, that's primarily, taking over. Yeah, and
Nice.
and so in Dragon Rage, down at the bottom here, there is a we put in for. Let's see, I'll skip past the art real quick. Sorry, blur. But so here's the story of that we have of Dragon Rage. A real quick synopsis. It says the oldest stories tell of men who shared an unnatural bond with the dragons. They were called Dragari, and they were worshipped as gods who walked among us. The Dragari slaughtered the dragons with magical weapons, enabling them to harness the powers of the dragon's rage. And for hundreds of years, the king of Zandahar, the true king of all the known lands, used the Dragari as an unstoppable army to defend the monarchy. Now a ruthless ruler sits on the throne of Zandahar, determined to rid the world once and for all of dragons. King Aldrich has sent the Dragari to the ends of the world to hunt the dragons down and claim their rage. But there are whispers that King Aldrich has a sinister motive, using the dragon's rage to build the fabled Crown of Fire. With this crown, the king would become the most powerful being in the world, even more powerful than Demargo, the Dragon King. The Dragari are now divided, those loyal to the monarchy and those who fear it. And a band of rebels, an old, broken down outcast, an orphan with an ancient, powerful secret, and a young mage with uncontrollable abilities will soon discover a truth that threatens the freedom of the world. So there's a lot of story in Dragon Rage, and then there's a lot of political things going on, love, betrayal, but this is the group here, of the rebel, on the right hand side. He's down below. His name is
Mhm.
Thrago. The orphan girl, her name is Nuri. She has pink hair. The young mage sitting in the back there by the dragon.
Hmm. Yeah, that art looks awesome.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I take a lot of pride, in my work, and I'm sort of grateful to those artists that are just doing like quick digital art, throwing stuff out there, and using assets, or you know
Mhm.
just the guys that are faking, being an artist, using digital. And I'm grateful to
Yeah.
those guys, and I'm grateful to the mainstream for publishing them, because now my work stands out.
Yeah, no, I understand what you mean. Not to sort of like down talk the work or anything, but if this were like 1991,
Yes, yeah,
it would still be good,
yeah,
but you'd have like Wildcats, you'd have Cyberforce,
yeah. And Mark Silvestri,
Youngblood.
Jim
Yeah.
Lee, yeah, yeah. I would blend right in with the amount of talent that was working. It was so competitive in the '90s, and there, to stand out, it was definitely hard. But today, if you're producing hyper detailed artwork, like this in this art style,
Mhm.
you stand out now.
Definitely. And another thing I noticed, just so far, this campaign is, I believe, just about double what you made on the first one, and then the second chance campaign for it. So it
Yeah.
seems like a lot of people are really responding to what you've been doing.
Yes, I mean, that's the goal for a creator, is that you want your campaigns to continue to grow. Where I think people look at, like an Eric July or an
Hmm.
Ethan Van Sciver. You see their campaigns hit $1 million, and you go, "Wow, their first campaign, $1 million." That, I mean, that's very successful. But for me, I think that would scare me. I mean, because I want to make sure, that that, you know, the logistics of it, of the fulfillment and all that stuff, you know, I want to make sure that, you know, I can complete it all and get it all out, and you know, without a hitch. Campaigns that big, wow, it's very scary. So I'm very, very grateful that my first campaign was under 20,000. You know, I think my first campaign was about 12,000. So I'm really excited. And then we ran the second chance with it, totaling at about 22,000 and about 400 subscribers, I think, somewhere at total together. So, I mean, backers. So, you know, I think I would rather have the slow burn
Hmm.
than to just like start at the top, because then where do you go from there if you hit the
Yeah.
top, you know? And this point here, you know, where I just continue to build. And I'm so grateful all the backers came back plus more.
Yeah,
So,
it's interesting too because for the last 6 months or so, I've been asking people just behind the scenes, how are things going? And pretty much everyone is telling me like, "Oh man, it's so much worse than it was. I'm so glad I started in 2018, this and that." And you're actually your numbers are way up.
yeah. And, you know, honestly, I sent out an update today thanking all my backers, because, you know, I was telling them that the success that this campaign has received, it isn't because of me. I can't take credit for it. It's because of my backers. And when you're putting out a campaign like this, you're asking people to, you know, to contribute their hard-earned money, you know, and
Hmm.
take a leap of faith, because, you know, for one, they don't know the quality of the product, you know, and then two, they don't know if the campaign is going to fulfill, because there are campaigns out there, you know, there's just a few, luckily, that didn't fulfill, or a few campaigns that, you know, take a lot longer than expected to fulfill. So they don't know what to expect, and so they're you know they're going out, and like I said, I mean, just taking that leap of faith with me. And I'm so grateful that almost 650 people have invested in me, you know, and it's very motivating. You know, it's exciting. So yeah, I can't take the credit for it. But I will say this, to creators that are out there. I'll be transparent, let you guys know that I work 7 days a week. My wife and I were just talking about this last night. I work 7 days a week, 14 hours a day, and I promote every opportunity I get everywhere I can. You know, and if you guys see me, like, I mean, I'm not on Twitter talking about the latest movie that's out. I'm not talking about the latest video game. I'm not talking politics. I'm talking Dragon Rage. Because if I have just a few minutes, in every moment of the day is valuable. My time is the one commodity I cannot afford to spend unwisely. So every moment is valuable. And if that moment's going to take me away from drawing and producing Dragon Rage, I need to make sure that it's being spent properly. So when I get on Twitter, it's promoting my book, Dragon Rage. When I get on YouTube, promoting my book, Dragon Rage. You know,
Yeah,
and
I think
it's a lot of work.
for sure. But it seems like it's paying off so far, and hopefully once this one gets out and into people's hands, the next one will be even better.
Yes, you know, that's the thing too, is that when I started this book about 9 months ago, and I started the campaign 9 months ago, and I didn't have anything drawn for the new Dragon Rage. So that's why the trailer itself has more special effects than art, because I didn't have much art done. And I started the book, and I just got in a rhythm, and it's going great. And then I'm a patient. I'm a heart failure patient,
Mm.
and my heart failure worsened to the point where I was going to die. You know, my heart function was down to 12%,
Ooh.
and somebody who's dying, your heart functions at 10. So I was that close to death, and that's not an exaggeration or anything. It was really tough, and I lost 6 months. It took me 6 months
Mm.
to get to the point where I'm at now, where my heart is, say, your ejection fraction for you, somebody who's healthy,
Yeah.
who doesn't have heart failure, your ejection fraction would be 70. You know, that's the healthy heart.
Hmm.
Mine right now is at 40. So in
Mm.
6 months, we are able to get it back to 40. So I'm not completely healthy, but you know, I can do the things I used to do before.
Yeah.
And so when I lost 6 months during the time and development of Dragon Rage, but when I looked at my artwork when I came back, I started to notice all the flaws in my work and said, you know what? I think I can do better. And I did. I went back, redrew everything, and I've learned so much. I've completed all 40 pages. All the pencils are done. All I'm doing now is just inking the pages and rendering them. And that's something that, I mean, I've done, that was my whole career for 30 years. So finally in an area in production that's familiar. I'm fast at it, you know, so that won't take me too much time. But I'm learning so much that I can't wait. Like you said, I can't wait for this book to get in the hands of backers because I know that that's going to be the best selling point. Like a used car salesman, like we talked about earlier, your goal is to get the person that comes on the lot, get them in the vehicle because the car will
Yep.
sell it for you. So, you know, that's what I want. I know my book's going to sell itself. And because I've worked so hard every day on my art, focused on my art, I've gotten so much better that I know by issue number two, if you think issue number one is good, and I know this doesn't sound humble, but issue number two is going to blow away issue number one because I'm learning every day, you know, and improving every day.
So, as a comic used car salesman, if somebody goes into Jimmy Reyes comic book store, which of the options do you think is the best for a new comic reader of the options you got for Dragon Rage?
This version right here. So if for all the backers that backed before that previous
Mhm.
version, that's not going to just we're not just tossing that. You know, we're not going to say no, that's not canon. It's gone. You know, we're not doing that to the backers. So this is the fresh new start. We're starting the story differently,
Mhm.
and I've been working with my writer, and we've come up with a way to bring that version of Dragon Rage back in as part of this story. So that book that we put out in 2020 will no longer be the first book in the story. It'll eventually fit back in. You know,
Oh.
say it'll fit back in and by the time we get to issue number 10. It'll become issue
Mhm.
number 11. You know, that fill in there and fit with the story. So if for new backers getting on, this is the campaign that you wanna get in on
Definitely.
this.
And of your options there on this campaign, which would you personally recommend for someone who's new
You know,
or just returning to comics?
I would say for someone, I would say go with the David Finch cover because,
Hmm.
for one, this is a cover. This was David Finch's first time ever in a crowdfunded campaign. Was this book, Dragon Rage? He had never done anything crowdfunded prior to this, and right now
Really?
the only crowdfunding stuff he has right now is a sketchbook from Monday night from his YouTube channel
Mhm.
and the art of David Finch, the Marvel Comics art. And those are his Kickstarters that he did. They're just art books. But this was the first time we had ever seen Dave's work in a crowdfunding campaign. So I think this
Hmm.
is going to be a little bit of history, and anybody who's a big fan of Dave's work, and Dave's huge, you know, I would say go with that. Or if you want to, surprisingly, the cover that everyone's going with is the main cover, my cover. It seems like people want to support the creator. They want the art from the guy who did the art on the inside. So
Yeah,
depend.
for me, I love David Finch's work, but if I'm gonna back a book by somebody who's primarily an artist, if they're the one sort of running the show, like that's the guy I want for the to get the cover for that. And also, I think a lot of people are kind of tired how the big two, like, they'll maybe have a good cover, but then the interior art doesn't match at all. I
Yeah.
kind of like back in the day where whoever was on the book, they did the interiors, but they also did a fantastic cover to go with it.
Yeah, yeah, and unfortunately, I mean, I wasn't collecting comics at that time, but that's something now as a more mature artist, I'm starting to appreciate, and I'm going back now, and I find myself I'm buying a lot of comic books from the early to mid '80s, and
Hmm. Hmm.
discovering a lot of the comic books that I had skipped past in the '90s, and but you know, even in the '90s, there were the books that that I did collect. I did collect, like I said, a lot of the independents where they
Hmm.
did their own covers because they couldn't
Yeah.
afford to buy one of these,
Yeah.
the cover from an established artist. So they had no choice to do their own covers, and you know, so when it came time to do this, I didn't ask anybody to do a cover, and Dave Finch offered, and he said, "Hey, I want to do a cover for you. You know, I really like this book. I like what you're doing. I like the concept, and I'm going to do the cover." And I mean, Dave's cover rate is it's. I mean, you could probably pay your rent for a few months,
Yeah.
just what he makes on a cover.
Yeah.
Um, you probably pay your rent for half a year, but so I knew I couldn't afford him, but thankfully, I mean, Dave's a good friend, and he donated, and he gave me that cover, and he even promoted the cover for me, did a live stream and everything, and
Wow.
I'm super grateful. Yeah, and not only Dave Finch, I have a friend who is has a YouTube channel, and he's got 25 million subscribers.
Nice.
He did a cover.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
ZHC.
maybe. I'm keeping it a secret, but most people
Oh,
are
okay.
already
All
kind
right.
of,
All right.
but so these all these I'm getting a lot of guesses. People are going ZHC, Mr. Beast, all that. Well, yes, you guys are right up there. One of those answers is right. So yeah, a friend of mine who has over 25 million subscribers on YouTube said to me, "Hey, I want to do. Can I do a cover for Dragon Rage? I mean, they see what I'm doing.
That's awesome.
They like the book, yeah, and I know I can't afford these guys, and I said, man, but I can't afford to pay you. I mean, my campaign's at 36,000, which means, I mean, it's expensive putting together a comic book. And there's a lot that goes into it. This is a startup company, so there's more than just printing and producing and shipping the comic book. I mean, a lot goes into it. I mean, you have to, get the copyrights. You have to get the trademarks. I've got to buy the printing label, set up the shipping station. I mean, tons of stuff goes into it. But he said, "Hey, I'm going to do it. I'm going to give it to you. Give you this cover." So this friend of mine who has this huge YouTube channel did an amazing cover, and he blew me away. When he did this cover, I knew he could draw. I knew he's a fantastic artist, but I didn't know he had gotten this much better. He's improving, and it's amazing. So I'm going to offer that in my next campaign. He's offered to help me
Hmm.
promote. So those that are
Wow.
getting in on this little campaign here, this modest campaign, you guys can say I got in on the ground floor, because the next campaign, even if I only get 1% of his 26 million fans and subscribers, it's still going to
Still,
be a huge campaign, and Dragon Rage is going to have
definitely.
much more exposure.
That's awesome. So then clearly you're going to do at least one more. Is this something that you see yourself doing as like sort of like the like American comics generally are, where they're on an ongoing series, or do you have like a definite like beginning, middle, end of the whole story in mind?
The first story arc will be a maxi series, about 6
Hmm.
issues. But the thing that I see a few creators that are in crowdfunding that I think you shouldn't do is that I think you need to invest time into an IP. You have to develop an
Hmm.
IP, because
Yeah.
people don't know these characters, where everybody knows the X-Men. I can
Right.
just say, "Oh, here's a Wolverine comic," and people will just jump right in because they know the character. They're emotionally involved with them. And it takes time to build up an intellectual property.
Yeah.
And the ultimate goal for me, not the ultimate goal. I mean, the ultimate goal is just to have all my readers and to get people to be emotionally invested into these characters, to like these characters. But as a creator and as an adult, not being a dreamer, I want eventually is to have to be able to license my characters, where
Hmm.
I want video games made. I would like to have action figures made. I wouldn't mind Hollywood making a movie. That's where the money is. That's if you want to be
Yeah.
able to retire and support yourself, reach the levels of Robert Kirkman, Todd McFarlane,
For sure.
Stan Lee. You want to get to that level, and you won't get there by just creating one book and hopping onto another one. Yeah, it takes time to build up the IP. So definitely a minimum of 6 issues at least for this book.
Hmm. And are you only going to work on this series until at least you get to that 6 issue period, or do you have other ideas that you're like, well, I want to do 2 books a year, or
Yeah.
how do you feel about that?
Yes, I have thousands of ideas. The writer I work with, he teases me and jokes around. He's like, Jimmy's just full of ideas, because I tell him all these crazy ideas that I've got. And so I'm thinking about maybe 2 books, leapfrogging 2 books, putting out another book in between, and then Dragon Rage, and then this other title, and then Dragon Rage, because I've got so many different ideas out there. But that's just, one option that I could go, and I'm not set in stone on that. I know I do have to focus on Dragon Rage. So right now, I'm also taking on some freelance work, doing covers for other independent creators out there and
Oh,
other
nice.
companies, doing covers. But I'm going to stop doing that once this book ends. Once I get this book out, because then Todd McFarlane mentioned where he stopped doing work for other companies because he no longer wanted to compete with himself. You know,
Hmm.
so
Yeah, I
once
can understand that.
once my book's out there and people see what I could do, I know that I'll get more offers. But I want that desire for my work. I want them to say that, oh, if I want Jimmy's work, I have to get it in Dragon Rage because that's the only place you can get it. You know, right
Ah,
now people don't
that's
know
a
what
good
I can
point.
do. Yeah, people have seen a few pages, but once you have the entire book, and I mean, there are so many big wow pages that I haven't shown that I wish. I'm like, this is my best work. I wish, but I want people when they get the comic to go wow and get excited. And when they're talking about how great the art is and the story, and talking about the characters, that'll be that's word of mouth, and that's the best. That's
Yeah.
the best sales pitch.
So, speaking of licensing out the IP, one thing I've been wondering, so we're kind of entering year 6 of like a really big push for independent comics. And a lot of people, they have several issues out, but do you ever see maybe some company, not necessarily one of the big two, but some company like going to all these people and saying, Jimmy, you already have these done. I want to license your book, and I want to, start publishing them on a monthly basis, or 40 pages, maybe it'd be like every other month or something like that. Uh, do you think that something like that would be interesting to a lot of the independent artists, sort of like a secondary book market?
Well, that's already happening. There are 2 companies around that do that. There's Anarchy
Oh,
Press that will take
okay, yeah.
a couple of the titles from the crowdfunding scene and publish them, and then there is Massive. Massive also published like Wesley Snipes' Exiled.
Mhm.
They did Sean Gordon Murphy's Plot Holes, and then his Zorro book too, I think. And so there are companies out there that will um, reprint stuff that has been, either Kickstarter or Indiegogo from, the crowdfunding scene. So that's starting to happen. I think people are starting to see the success and the interest in these titles, in the crowdfunding scene. So yeah, maybe I think there could be more out there. For me, I'm not interested in another company
Mhm.
doing what I could do, because then they take a percentage. And I know for some people
Sure.
that is, they don't have like, so I have a background in advertising. I grew up
Oh, okay.
that was, I worked in comics since 1991, but I never went full time in comics because I always needed benefits, having health issues.
Yeah.
I was, and having a family. So I always worked in as a web developer. I was a graphic designer. I work for national magazines, laying out their magazines, their books. So I know how to do all the production, lay it all out. I know how to do the pre-press and get it all ready and deal with printers. I've done all that before. So for me, I'd like to go the route that like Brian Polito and,
Mhm.
Billy Tucci are doing. They kickstart
Yep.
their book and then they put out a different form of that book in comic stores. So
Okay.
I wouldn't mind doing something like that where I do a crowdfunded version and put together, offer perks and specialty covers and all these different specialty perks and prints and stuff, and then do a collected edition with a different cover and offer that into a comic store? Because it seems like comic stores are a little more interested right now in graphic novels.
Yeah, I think so. I always wondered. It's what I call a high-low strategy, where you have your premium, ultra deluxe crowdfunder, and of course, people are going to get like they're going to get maybe an ash can, or they're going to get all sorts of sketches and maybe
Yeah,
character
autograph
bios and stuff.
copies or yeah.
And then you have the low version, which I mean, you could even find newsprint to make the cost cheaper. Maybe the colors would be closer to flats than more modern colors, but you wouldn't get any of that extra stuff. It's just that,
Yeah.
I've wondered because one of the things for me is again with trying to get new people in, it's just that the cost sometimes is prohibitive. Like people are like, "Ooh, $25, I don't know." Whereas like if you were at a store somewhere and you said, "Oh, well this one's like $4 or $5, maybe you would plunk down the money for that."
Well,
But,
let's take
you
it
know,
back to the car
mhm,
analogy that we did. So if you go into a dealership and say you want an inexpensive car, well, there's Hyundai. You go
yeah,
in. It doesn't matter. You don't need the leather. You don't need the fancy things. You just need to get from point A to point B. So you go in and you get a mass-produced Hyundai. But if you want luxury, quality, you want something that people are going to admire, you go to Bentley. And you
yep,
know that Bentley is going to be so much more costly than the Hyundai, and it's going to take longer to produce. I mean, delivery, if you go in and buy a Bentley, delivery on a Bentley is 6 months to a year before you get your
mhm,
Bentley because they custom tailor that thing. And, there's so many perks to it and amenities, and so that's what crowdfunding is. That's what this comic is. This is a Bentley. This is
mhm,
high quality art where we've taken the time to put together a great story, good characters, high quality paper, print. I've
yep,
got a fantastic team on this book. David Finch cover. Andrew Dollhouse. Look at those. I mean, those colors that you're looking at right there. Andrew Dollhouse. He colors Batman. He colors DC Comics. He colors, for Marvel. And these guys, he's not cheap. So, but it's a fantastic team. So
yeah,
yeah, that's the difference. I think is, what it depends on what you're looking for.
nice. Um, and so there is a link in the description for the Indiegogo campaign. There's also a link at the top of the chat for anyone who's listening. So, of course, the best book for anyone to get right now would be Dragon Rage. But what other books are you excited for?
Man, I get to be on this show, CG Kings, where
Hmm.
these guys, the reason that they're called the Kings, not so much that they think they're better than everyone. I mean, these guys are super talented, all very, very talented. They all are excellent creators. They've been doing this for years. Even they have way more experience than I do. Some of them on there. I love anything just about Aaron Lopresti.
Hmm.
I've been a big fan of his long before, and when I got to hang out with Aaron Lopresti, I was starstruck. So but there's just so many. I mean, there's Shane Davis. I mean, he's great books, and I don't think he really realizes. I mean, I never expressed to him how I admire his creativity, his book. I like a lot of his titles. I think, and so I backed his book. I got Inglorious Rex #2, and I'm
Hmm.
excited about it. I've got John Malin's Godlike. So those are two books that I'm really waiting on. But honestly, there are guys that are unheard of out there that are producing some really great books. Like there was a book called Frog G that was out there,
Oh yeah, yeah.
all ages, and I'm excited to get that book. These guys are doing fantastic work. So, man, to just recommend one, I mean, I couldn't because there's so many, right now in Comicsgate, like we said, like in manga, no matter what you're into, you're going to find something that you like in
Yeah.
Comicsgate. There's so many creators creating just a wide variety of things. You got a frog who's got cybernetic, technology put on him from outer space, and You know, you've got one that has cats that have superpowers. You know, these cats that have these
Hmm.
little
Hmm.
magical crystals, and you know, you got all kinds, you know, of great titles out there. We got one that deals with a wraith. You know, if you're into like Ghost Rider
Yep.
and Supernatural, we got Wraith of God, and so you know, I mean, there's something for everybody. It wouldn't be hard for you guys to find in Comicsgate.
All right. Well, you've been a great guest, and I don't want to keep you too long. Any last thoughts?
Any last words before it's like a pirate ship? You know, honestly, I just say thank you. You know, I appreciate people like you, the backers, the viewers, everybody out there that has taken the time to help us to, you know, present our projects to your, you know, to your viewers, and everybody out there who's retweeting my tweets. Without you guys, you know, I mean, I would be yelling into a canyon, and I mean, how would people find my book, you know? And so I appreciate it. It may not seem like much, you know. I know you bring people on so often, but honestly, I'm very grateful for that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So once again, Dragon Rage, Indiegogo, pick it up now while you can. Also, you have your own website, iheartcomics.com. Is that a good place for people to keep up with you and what's going on?
Yeah, Ironheart Comics came about by the fact that of heart failure. Not only
Oh,
myself, but my writer also had heart issues this year,
ooh,
and so for him, he was able to have surgery and have it reversed. For me, unfortunately, I'll be on medication for the rest of my life.
ooh.
But I thought about it, and I thought we overcame. You know, I overcame heart failure. He overcame, you know, his issue with his heart. Ironheart Comics. So when you go there, ironheartcomics.com, it'll take you to my page, the Jimmy Reyes art page. I'm still building that page, but there's a newsletter sign up on it. So if you sign up for a newsletter on there, to keep you up to date on everything that I'm working on, all the new titles I'm working on. Ironheart Comics now is going to be my company names that I'm going to publish under. And, you know, I'm also, you know, if you guys sign up for that, that's where I'm going to post when I start hiring writers, other artists. I've already hired a few people to work with me, and I'm going to send it through that post long before through that newsletter, because I've noticed that I have a lot of artists follow me.
Mhm.
So when I went looking for an artist, I went through my newsletter. But I also give away stuff. I give away, you know, a certain time we'll do giveaways with special covers. I'll sign them, give them away through the newsletter. I give away digital
Mm.
products because I develop digital products for Clip Studio Paint, and I post it on there. I sometimes I give away free like wallpaper, stuff like that, and all that goes through that newsletter. So it's not just give me your email. You're gonna get junk email from Jimmy. There's some goodies in there too. You know.
Some perks.
Yeah, there's perks.
All right. And everyone else, tomorrow night, I have Victor Gorchev. He does a lot of independent tabletop games. He's
Oh,
currently got a Kickstarter with Urban Fantasy for,
oh.
I believe it's for original Dungeons and Dragons rule set. We'll double check with him on that tomorrow. Friday, you can find me on the Dungeon Delvers channel playing classic Gamma World. I play Rex Dashington, human in a mech suit. And Saturday, back here on this channel, I've got the Nerd Council of Doom. We're going to go over all sorts of topics, perhaps talking about what the best TV setup for the big game or home movies are. And also, if you're a nerd, what can you do for a nerd girl on Valentine's Day? So we'll
That's
have
awesome.
that, maybe the new Netflix Avatar series. We'll see how that's going. And next week, next Thursday, I have Peter Samedi and Rob Geronimo talking about Alterna Comics' new Indiegogo and King Cryptid Blood Realm crossover.
Wow.
So thank you everyone for coming, and hopefully we'll see you back tomorrow.